Hello, everybody, and here we are again. I'm John Barnwell in the city north of Detroit, here with another fellow expatriate, Detroiter, Douglas Gabriel, who, as everybody knows, is my greatest teacher and my greatest pupil. And so, without much further ado, hello, Douglas.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm excellent. Yeah, I thought this was kind of a spontaneous episode, shall we say. We usually spend more time, but we've spent so much time over the last 11 episodes that I'd like to think that at least something stayed within our consciousness so that we could continue on. But in light of today is a very special day, and that it happens to be the festival of the Ascension of Jesus Christ. And so, with that being said, I'm going to share a quotation of Rudolf Steiner that sums up just about everything. Herein he says, "The deed of Christ on Golgotha is an objective fact. Its cosmic significance does not depend upon what men believe about it," end quote. And so that's a pretty direct statement to Rudolf Steiner that points towards this kind of a dual aspect to the mystery of the Ascension, because he talks about in the festivals and their meaning, and in the lecture on the Ascension and Whitsun tide, he talks about how the center of Earth evolution, as we know it, the fourth period, Earth is the fourth, following old Saturn, old Sun, old Moon, as those of you that follow us should already realize. And so the Earth is the fourth stage, as represented in the esoteric teachings of Christianity and elsewhere. And so consequently, in looking at this more closely, you'll see that really the center of Earth evolution was during the fourth period, which would be the period of Atlantis. And so since that time, we've been actually going into a decline as far as the Earth incarnation itself. And by the time of the incarnation of Christ at the baptism in Jordan, and where he indwelled Jesus of Nazareth for a little over 3 years, that at that time, Earth evolution had got to a point to where the forces of Lucifer and Ahriman, or Satan, the spirit of materialism, and Lucifer, the spirit of infinite pride, you could call him, infinite self-centeredness. And so in light of the end result of their activities within Earth evolution, the ancient mysteries had fallen into decline, and dark spirits were gaining a foothold across the globe. And it was threatening the actual continuation of the physical mission of mankind, to be able to go through this physical state and come out at the end result becoming spirits of freedom and love. And as St. Paul said, "You shall be as the angels." And so if you look at that and you get into the indications with Steiner about that, he, on the one hand, says that the Ascension is an admonition, in that the result of the incarnation of Christ and the mystery of Golgotha was that the integrity of the physical body and the etheric body were maintained and prevented from going into total decline and having us lose Earth evolution altogether. And so in doing that, it's for all mankind, even for those that don't believe in the Christ. But with the festival of Whitsun, which follows the seventh Sunday after Easter, that festival, which in the 1970s, the British converted it from the Whitsun festival to a bank festival. Why not? So that tells you where they're at. But so the challenge of the Whitsun is, whereas in saving the physical etheric integrity of mankind for all mankind, regardless of what their opinions might be, the Whitsun festival is very distinct in that what it has to do with is those that are willing to bring to their life the awareness of the mystery of Golgotha and what it all means to bring. And of course, that's a difficult thing because it tends to get relegated into the academicians' arguments over points of law and philosophy. And rather than take us in a direction of all that abstract thinking, which is essentially a fear result, Rudolf Steiner says elsewhere, which is one of the most interesting analyses I've ever seen of the abstract thinking, that it's a fear response to the spiritual world, so that it attempts to enfold itself in this kind of cozy materialism that they've figured everything out, when actually they're just like children playing with blocks. And so with the mystery of Whitsun, something comes into effect that's very different, in that now we can be revivified while we sleep, to the extent that we are willing to participate in that mystery of Golgotha. And so that is the Christic stream of evolution. And that is really more pointed at the end of the book of Revelation. Douglas and I had a conversation the other day about the book of Revelation, and we were both commenting about how rare it is for people to get to the best part. And that's the glorious culmination of the book of Revelation. And so that kind of dovetailed into my thoughts on this conversation. And I'm sure Douglas has more than a little bit to share with us. But it's the physical etheric in the admonition that for all mankind, and then it's the astral and the ego that goes through the mystery of Pentecost and the revealed spiritual nature of Christ.
Wow, I didn't know that's what we were going to talk about. So this is great because we've been talking about cosmic intelligence, and I just want to make sure that we remember that there's a difference between human intelligence and cosmic intelligence and artificial intelligence. And you can go up into supernature, or you can go down into subnature. But you don't really get a choice to stay at just the human level. You need to develop your intelligence. And of course, discernment is key to that, and truth is key to that. I think we're also going to address this question of truth, but first, I'd like to dwell on what you just talked about. Reliving the festival of the year in a religious liturgy, and through meeting the cosmos, cosmic intelligence, with your human intelligence that tries to align with the best example we have, Jesus Christ's example. So we take our yearly festivals from basically the life of Christ. And these are absolutely critical moments also in our relationship to the cosmos, in our relationship to nature. And in a way, this is what we're supposed to be working on. Rudolf Steiner kind of re-enlivened what people thought about all those festivals. And he emphasized that for the festival of St. Michael, which is almost John's birthday, that is what we're supposed to really be celebrating. The Archangel Michael, this solar being who's now risen from the realm of the archangels into the realm of the archai to become the time spirit, our spirit of the times. This being Michael is very key to bringing us into relationship with what happens at Pentecost, at Whitsun, which is the Holy Spirit is given to those who have faith. But the original people who received it in the upper room received it as a gift of Christ giving his own Holy Spirit for all time to come to human beings, to always be there for our own personal ascension, our own personal development. And these tongues of flames that came down upon their heads, and then they were able to speak to everyone in a language that, no matter what language you were natively born to, you could understand what they were saying. What is that? That's the language of the Spirit. That's cosmic intelligence. And as we look at Christ's ascension, we are looking at his promise that he rose up into the clouds. He said, he gave all kinds of prophecies of how that would happen when he would return. I'm not going to get into that. That's a whole other question. But that Christ ascended and he's still in this realm that we can contact. But then the Holy Spirit is in the realm that we see happened with the apostles at Pentecost. So the tongues of flame, the Holy Spirit, Christ not actually ever leaving us. As a matter of fact, Rudolf Steiner tells us that Christ ascended into the etheric realm and that Christ is still working in that etheric realm. Because as John has pointed out, the mystery of Golgotha, the crucifixion and death of Christ and his descent into hell, as it's called, though that's a very debatable topic, and then his rising up and then his resurrection became his next mission, which was he had redeemed the physical. Now Christ was going to redeem and is still redeeming the etheric realm. And it is through Michael that we can look into that realm of the etheric. From the realm of the angels, we can look into the realm of the archangels. And there we can see Christ if we had the eyes to see, the ears to hear. And of course, the purity of heart to even have the moral stature to be able to perceive that. Or in another sense, Christ comes when people are in great, great need. You don't have to have done great meritorious moral work for Christ to come and manifest to us now, because he's in the etheric. He can manifest in as many places as he wants, to as many people as he wants. And this has become a phenomena that Rudolf Steiner has talked about. Christ reappearing, or Christ appearing in the etheric, is Christ's second coming. So if you're going to rise into cosmic intelligence, it is through these realms of rising through the angelic, the archangelic, the archai realm, and into the realm of the Elohim, the realm where Christ has his local manifestation in this solar system, as it were. And so it's beautiful that you brought that. Now, I would say that anyone can attain those things without knowing any of those Christian terms, without knowing the seasons, by simply living the seasons of the year, and without any dogma, without any religious terminology, without any jargon, without any teacher or priest or anyone else. You can get to the same place, in my opinion, by simply doing one thing: going on the quest for truth. And I know that you and Reverend have been talking about this for quite some time. How long's it been? Two years or something like that? I think I filled in once.
Yeah, we've got we're on our I think our next episode would be the 81st episode, and so
okay,
something that we belabored the point.
I don't know about that. Have you gotten to the bottom of it, and have you found ultimate truth and shown people the way to get there? Well, because that's the mission of life. That's the quest for the Holy Grail. That's the quest for your higher self. That's ascension. And on the path, you're going to experience these things that Christ did, including some type of crucifixion, even if it's only in the feeling realm. But for me, it's all been about truth. So when I was a child, I'm going to tell a little bit of my biography here. I don't know that I've ever done this on tape, as I call it, because I'm old. But I was born clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, and I was dedicated to the church at my baptism because the priest that baptized me was clairvoyant. Later became the person who ran Conception Abbey, the largest house of religious formation for priests in the Catholic Church in America. And he became the chief exorcist of America. Later, it became very suspect that when I found out that the person I thought was my father wasn't my father, that it seems as if there are indicators to say that that priest was my father. Later, he became my teacher when I was 14, I think. And he got me into the Catholic Church at a very early age. So, I was lied to by my mom, my dad, the priest in the Catholic Church. Just about everything about my life was a lie, as far as I could tell. And at a very early age, I couldn't understand. I'd look at people and I could see their thoughts and their feelings, and then I'd watch their actions. And oftentimes they went in three different directions. And I had to start asking myself at a very early age, why are they saying one thing and speaking something else? Is that a lie? Do they know they're lying? Where's the truth in this? Am I supposed to notice this? I assumed everybody noticed it. I assumed every time somebody was obviously lying that I certainly noticed they were lying, and you could just tell by the tone of their voice. I assumed everybody else did. Then I found out later that people who can see or hear or know the truth are actually no friend of the church, Catholic Church. They're no friend of anybody because nobody really wants to hear the truth, especially if it's self-knowledge. If I'm telling you about yourself and it's true because I can look at your aura and read it and tell you what your past incarnations are in the old days and blah, 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 blah. Does anyone want to hear that? Even when they were paying me up to $500 an hour, nobody really wanted to hear it. So I always tape recorded it so I could say later, I told you so. And by the way, you got a deal because everything I told you was true. And so I learned early on as a soothsayer, starting when I was a teenager and reading, using every device you can to do divination, to seek the truth. Sooth means truth. So John was a soothsayer. John taught me how to be a soothsayer with the playing cards. And it's the number one system I use now because it's so quick and so incredibly effective with relationships, but also with characterological dispositions. It's better than, it's not more effective or more poignant than astrology, but it's as good as reading the palms or the eyes or the ears or the bumps in your head or any of the other things that we've been taught to read over the years, because John was the manager of the Mayflower Bookshop, the number one esoteric, occult, spiritual, Christian, but all religion, universal religion bookshop in the English-speaking world, hands down. And I know because for a long time, that's where we got our truth. So I traveled all over the world looking for books, and I wouldn't carry many clothes in my backpack, but my backpack was always filled with the books I was collecting when I was traveling. And so when I came across the Mayflower Bookshop when I came to Detroit many, many years ago, I met the owner. And his name is Robert Thibodeau. And he's a very good, mundane, predictive astrologer, probably one of the best in the world. And this little shop had all the books. It had all the spiritual books. And by the way, by that time, because I was taken to the Catholic Church at age 14, and they sent me through an accelerated program, I had already had degrees in comparative religion, philosophy, and Doctor of Divinity, and so on and so forth. Going through first the Benedictines, later the Trappists, and then later the Jesuits. I came to the Mayflower and talking to the owner, Robert Thibodeau, and he was studying theosophy at the time. And I said, well, look, some of the ideas you have about theosophy they're not correct. I don't know who told you this stuff, but this is completely wrong. So we would debate, and he called me the anthroposophic kid, which is a name for someone who studied Rudolf Steiner. So I was the anthroposophic kid. I went in there almost every Saturday because I'd break away from where I was working, and I'd come and I'd visit because I had been there years before selling him crystals, because I used to sell crystals to all the metaphysical shops, all the crystal shops. One of the first people out there doing it. So I'd sold him crystals before. I knew all about the shop. And I'd go in there looking for this or that. And we get into these amazing debates, let's just call it. And so, and all the time I went in there, John Barnwell was not there, though he was in fact the manager. I never saw him. And I'm taught every Saturday I'd go there, right? And so then Bob challenged me. He goes, okay, that's it. I've had it with you. Get the smartest dude you know. I'm going to get the smartest dude I know. And we're going to sit down and we're going to hash this out. And I'm going, what are you talking about? Okay, whatever. I'm always up for a good debate. So I got Brian Lynch, the smartest anthroposophist I knew at the time, and he got Ted Lucas. I love Teddy, and he's an esotericist, but no. So our first meeting was at Brian's house, and it was just a disaster. And then Bob kicked Ted out and invited John. So I'd never met John, mind you, and I'd been buying books for some time at the Mayflower and going there all the time. So I had Brian, he had not met John. So John comes in, and I look at John, and I recognize him as a brother from a previous incarnation, and we have this very funny exchange. And from that time on, we created a group called the Monastic Club. So John, you said we were going to talk about the old days because people wanted to hear that. So I'm talking about the old days. So tell them about the Romantic Futurists, the Monastic Club, and what we ended up doing.
Okay, that's fair, because after all, that is what I prepared you to talk about, is some of our biography, but I don't see that as counterindicating the nature of what we're discussing today, as far as today being the actual festival of that whole mystery where Christ rises up into the clouds. And so what was that? And the basic discrepancy, and by the way, Robert said to me, he said, you owe me big time for this one. I'm going to introduce you to this Steiner kid.
Oh, you never told me that. That's funny. You owe me. Yeah.
Yeah, you owe me big time for this.
Thank you, Bob. I'll start making payments.
And but in my recall, really the first time we really had a conversation in the Goethean sense was we went out and got Mexican food for lunch that one day, and over on 9 Mile of Woodward, and we sat down and we just started comparing notes regarding the Steiner studies that we have done, and the comparative studies and everything like that. And I noticed the effect of that in conversing with Douglas. I could find things in my personal memory more easily than if I wasn't talking to him. So I thought that was interesting, that there's this kind of etheric, that the mirror of the etheric is our life body of memory. That's the content that is streaming from the logos. That's the central impulse that's coming from that realm of the sun. And so the etheric body, as in the mystery of the ascension, the etheric body longs to stream in and merge with that great sun nature. But Christ is here now. So you don't have to go anywhere to find what that really is. And so in finding it in your own personal destiny, you'll see that Rudolf Steiner once made the comment, somebody asked him about one's guardian angel, and he said, if you can carry in your consciousness every individual that you meet within the course of a year, you'll have an image of your relationship to your guardian angel. So I paraphrase that there. And so what is this? And it's that as we work on ourselves, as we develop our strivings, other compatriots will come to meet us. And they're around. There's people around that during the course of the day, perhaps even at random, they will give you a clue to something that you've been in meditative thought on for some time, so that you have to allow life to unfold. It's like King Wen seeing that the trigrams on the shell of the tortoise, that we're always being given the truth all the time. But at the same token, our perception of it, because of the nature of our consciousness, has become untrue in a sense, because it's incomplete. And so that you have your physical nature, your physical senses and all of that, but it's becomes the challenge for you through this mystery of the ascension to be able to go towards the Whitsun experience, and that's where you consciously participate in the transformation of your astral body and your ego. And so to say that, and then to get into what Douglas is referring to in groups that we've started. Rudolf Steiner was very specific that he said it was necessary for an experience of community to unfold, to create a context for this new orientation of consciousness. And so in our relationship with our group, which we had a art and poetry group, the Romantic Futurists, and we had our deeper kind of discussion group we called the Monastic Club. And of course, we had a comical appearance of association through the antediluvian water buffaloes. Ack, and ack to you too, Fred. And of course, that was everything was always with a sense of humor, because we didn't think we were so great. We were just souls striving in the same direction. And so that brought us all together. And there's quite a list of people that are all very significant in their own right, because most of the people that were involved in that had ran bookstores of an esoteric nature in different areas of the country. And they had all come together because of the Waldorf Institute of Teacher Training, of which Douglas was the protege of Werner Glass, who was the head of the Institute, and Douglas was his protege, and he was there for 11 years. As Douglas says, 11 years. So that he had heard Werner's lessons on Waldorf education, of which he has some 50-some lectures. He'd gone through that whole curriculum 11 times. And so I guess what I want to say is I'm so honored to have a friend like this, because there's that calling in you that cries out, literally, and to see if there's anything out there. And at this point in time, you could very much say, because Rudolf Steiner had said at the time that he was living around World War I, that was the time of the sixth trumpet. And it's very easy to see with the circumstances that are rising today that we have entered into, in a sense, the epic of the seventh trumpet. And so that there's this call to people. Now's your chance to try and approach the mystery of Golgotha.
Which is, of course, the most important thing that you need in seeking the truth and in finding your own personal path of ascension. And yes, it's when you get together with other people who have studied the same body of wisdom, like we have studied anthroposophy or theosophy, and we can make a list. I told John the other day, I should make a list of all the groups I've joined that I've been initiated into. So I started in my head the other day, after I said that to you. I got to 54 and then I fell asleep. So I've been initiated into at least 54 different groups that all thought that they had the one truth. And what I found is there is one truth. It's called the golden rule. It's the law that Christ gave us. That's it. That's all there is, as far as I can tell. And I got a degree, a PhD in comparative religions. And there's only one thing, only one truth. And that's love God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, you could say, and love your neighbor as yourself.
I just wanted to add that it's curious that there's 54 minor cards in the tarot deck. 22 major arcana and 54 minor arcana.
That's funny. Yeah, that's funny because all these things. No, I was just an idiot all my life, just being pushed here, being pushed there. Voices would say, "You have to go do this now," and I'd go, "I don't want to," and then I'd still do it because I, just like everyone I saw, still was going in three different directions, thinking, feeling, and willing, and they weren't coherent. So I was led along and basically didn't really have much choice with what I was doing when I was young. And so I got into all kinds of strange things. But, I'm not the only one. John Barnwell, he's a master mason. I mean, hello. John Barnwell is, I could list at least a dozen of those spiritual groups that you've been initiated into. One of my favorite was, of course, Sufism, but kind of a Western Sufism through Pir Vilayat Khan. I know you were initiated by Pir. And I became a Sufi teacher, which is universalism. So in every time that I taught the Sufi dancing, we gave homage to the 7 world religions, or basically other religions that fit in there also. But it wasn't done until you'd given homage to all 7 world religions. So eventually, in all of my studies and all the strange things that I've done, it all came down just to a real simple thing. I wanted to stop being a priest, and I just wanted to be a Waldorf teacher. And so I believed that my school and the school population was like my parish. And so I became like the father of the school, and that's what I did. And so for a long time, I traveled all over the world studying anthroposophy under many guises, and every spiritual person that I heard about, I would go to meet them and sit down and chat with them. And what John was talking about before, when 2 anthroposophists get together, the morphic resonance that happens by you knowing the parlance, the jargon of anthroposophy, the language, you can save 10 billion words, and you can have conversations on a level that is literally super sensible, and it's unparalleled. Well, I traveled around the world, and I tried to meet every person I could. But in the end, it's very strange. The only place that I could actually come, I tried going to be a Waldorf teacher in Spring Valley, New York, and the school died while I was there. I went to try to become a Waldorf teacher through Rudolf Steiner College. The school died while I was there, literally in the first weeks of being there. So I came to Detroit. And I didn't know much about Detroit, but then I found out that Detroit is really one of the spiritual centers of the world, and that just about anybody you can name, and John could probably name hundreds of people because he has it all in his head of all the people that have come through Detroit that have started spiritual movements, continued spiritual movements, been leaders of spiritual movements, just about everybody. And if they didn't come through Detroit, then they were in Chicago. So on this one ley line between Detroit and Chicago, you have basically some kind of a magical place where incredibly brilliant people have come. Some would say that's because of the salt, the tremendous amount of salt that is beneath the city of Detroit, the whole area around Detroit. And some would say it was the line where the advancing mile-high ice glacier, stripped everything from the north all the way down in Michigan to a certain place, and then it receded. When it receded, it left 10,000 lakes and basically carved out the land and carved out the Great Lakes. But beneath Detroit and all the way to Pennsylvania, New York, is one of the largest salt deposits in the whole world. So we used to study this. Why is it that so many spiritual people came to Detroit? And I'm telling you, I don't even want to get started on listing all of them, because then I'll start getting off into the weeds saying, well, yeah, I knew them. John knew them. John knew the people. Why? Because the Mayflower Bookshop was this, not only the esoteric center of the Western tradition in terms of getting access. It was like the internet in those days of the spiritual books that you needed if you wanted to go on the path of ascension towards cosmic intelligence. And John was the person to call and ask. So from, the first time, you're right, I remember now sitting there eating the botana. Matter of fact, I think we had a long tradition of sharing a botana and having a conversation about this stuff, because John actually ended up knowing the most about what philology, the books that are in print, the books that were ever in print, or any book that was ever made about anybody who was spiritual. And John not only knew them, he'd read the book, and he could get access to the book. He could get you whatever you wanted. Plus, he could do the thing that is the most important. When you're seeking truth, you need someone to bounce it off of. You need someone to say, well, what do you think about this? And sometimes just having the conversation, you'll hear truth ring through that. I call it morphic resonance. And morphic resonance is literally in the etheric body. And the etheric body right now is, of course, as we just mentioned, where Christ is manifesting strongly in the etheric body of the earth and in the etheric body of the individual. And so when you have someone who understands this concept, like John does, and I try to, that memory, it's actually nowhere in you. You access it through your blood, through your I am in your blood, through the silica, through the iron, and through the minerals and the other content of your blood. But when it comes down to it, as Rudolf Steiner says, memory comes to you from outside and comes into you, just like thought does. And so John taught me a long time ago, because I used to have, as he can attest, a very good memory. Now I have a very bad memory, but he's the one who taught me this. Oh, you have unlimited memory because you're not storing it in yourself. You're storing it in the etheric, and the etheric is ruled by Christ. And Christ's sixth, well, you could debate whether it's the fifth or sixth gift of Christ is memory for the human being. And I must admit, I have never met anyone who had a better memory for spiritual topics than John Barnwell. And that is the reason I often call him Professor Barnwell, though I myself am a professor and have degrees, and they mean nothing, because when you sit down with some people, your own ignorance shines in your face real clearly. And so for all these years, I don't know, John, how long's it been? It's been decades. I don't know. I can't remember. It's at least been like 25, 8 years, I don't know, 30, I don't know, a long time. I've been bouncing things off of you to see if you could tell me if it was true or not. And that's what you need in the world. People do that to me all the time, and most of the time I don't know. I used to know because I was clairvoyant. I'm not anymore. But I'd know if God would allow me to know. But now I just have to study. So when people ask me crazy things, I just have to go study it really hard and try to find the truth, because in our age, we live in what's called the post-truth era. Truth doesn't matter anymore. It matters whether you can sell your product. That's all that matters, is money, the worship of mammon, and the 7 deadly sins. And so when you're on the path for truth, you need to develop discernment, but you also need a good buddy, and you need a group. And we had a group of 4 who created the monastic club, but the antediluvian water buffaloes, that was like 12 people. And then our study group was like 200 people. And then when the romantic futurists got together, it could be as many people as the venue would hold. And for all these years, we just did, everyone did their art, and they would come together in kind of a celebration to share their art, almost as a festival of higher thinking, what's called manas. So we would get together sometimes, and though there would be art and music and dance and food and everything else, a certain group, the monastic club, would sit down, the 4 of us, and we'd have a conversation that everyone would listen in on, and we'd record it. And we would know the topic ahead of time, and we'd try to have a Goethean conversation where every remark built upon the other person's remark until you literally created a spiritual edifice, a spiritual building, and you invited in a higher hierarchical being. And because it was so successful, that's why so many people came. Nowadays, John, if we called a meeting, how many people would show besides you and I? I don't think anybody.
Yes, well, that's the beauty of it, is that it is a mystery. And so in looking at this, and first I have to address something that was earlier in your commentary. And I've mentioned this on various podcasts, but it's such a great quote, and it embodies something that Douglas and I both wholeheartedly agree. And it's Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. It's a letter to Sulpice Boisret in March 22nd of 1831. And wherein Goethe says, quote, "I have found no confession of faith to which I could ally myself without reservation. Now, in my old age, however, I have learned of a sect, the Hypsisterians, who, hemmed in between heathens, Jews, and Christians, declared that they would treasure, admire, and honor the best, the most perfect that might come to their knowledge, and, inasmuch as it must have a close connection to the Godhead, pay it reverence. A joyous light thus beamed at me suddenly out of a dark age, for I had the feeling that all my life I'd been aspiring to qualify as a Hypsisterian. That, however, is no small task, for how does one, in the limitations of one's individuality, come to know what is most excellent? And so there you have it. It doesn't matter to me, it doesn't matter to Douglas what your particular confession is. It's what you do. It's your willingness to approach the mystery of Golgotha by whatever path. But I don't want to limit that with a bunch of abstract concepts. And Rudolf Steiner, he encapsulates it here very succinctly in the lecture on the Whitsun mystery and its connection with the Ascension from May 7th, 1923 in Dornach, wherein he says, and I quote, "In the course of the evolution of mankind, the different world religions have placed mighty pictures before humanity. If these pictures are to be fully understood, a certain esoteric knowledge is required. In the course of years, such a knowledge, based on anthroposophy, has been applied to the interpretation of all the four Gospels, in order that their deeper content and meaning may be brought to light. This content is for the most part in the form of pictures, because pictures refuse to communicate themselves in the narrow, rationalistic way that is possible with concepts and ideas. People think that once a concept has been grasped, they have got to the root of everything to which is relevant. No such opinion is possible in the case of a picture, an imagination. A picture or an imagination works in a living way, like a living being itself." And so there you have it. We very early on, whether we fully were aware of the insights that it represented, but that the mission for this understanding of Whitsun is an artistic mission. It's the art of being human. It's not the philosophy of being human or the theology of being human, although they can contribute, of course. But it's that whole idea of the artistic approach that Goethe embodied and was so well expressed in the fairy tale, The Lily and the Green Snake. It left you perfectly free to have your own impressions related to the images that are enfolded within that story. Or you could also say The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, something that we spent more than our fair share of time riddling with. And the great Christian Rosenkreutz anthology by Paul Marshall Allen, working with Carlo Pietzner, who's an old friend of ours. And Carlo Pietzner, I remember one time when he came to the Institute, he would frequently come there, and he was one of the leaders of the Camp Hill movement that was started by Karl Koenig. And it was dealing with the cognitively challenged people. And so Carlo is just this really quite a very impressive Central European. He comes up and he does a lecture on life without Goethe. And so that kind of describes America, is that we don't have embedded within our culture the treasures that have been given to mankind through Goethe or Novalis or that whole cast of characters that are represented in the both the Sturm und Drang movement and in the Romantic movement that was started by the Schlegels. And so there's this whole depth of culture that's not present here in America. And so we have to compensate for that. And in coming to our understanding, it was interesting because in our circle of people they were conversant in the secret doctrine and theosophy and in anthroposophy for the most part, and in all these other schools. So we were able to really take a Hypsisterian look at the spiritual culture of Earth evolution. I went on and created a massive database of Egyptology and Mesopotamian studies, and I did a relational database for occult science and esoteric studies, and so I've been exposed to so many authors and different presentations and formats, and I always would gravitate from the very, very beginning, because when I was in junior high, the grandson of the Polish ambassador happened to be standing next to me in gym class because of alphabetical reasons. His name was the next in the alphabet to mine. And he turned to me one day and he said, "Have you ever heard of Rudolf Steiner?" And it was like a bell rang in my heart. It just felt good. I didn't know anything about anything really at that point, other than that it rang a bell in my heart, and it took a while for destiny to unfold. But Rudolf Steiner, in quite an early lecture cycle, talks about the distinction between philosophy, theosophy, and occultism, and he says that the philosophy began in the 6th century BC, and it ties into thinking with the thinking apparatus of the brain, which is like Plato's cave. You're observing the image of reality. It's like this mirroring process. But he said that with the theosophical understanding was different, and that's something that arises from the heart. And so he said it'd be much easier for people that gravitated towards the theosophical understanding to come into relationship with truth. And of course, over and above that, the most profound level is occultism. And what is the other name in my mind for occultism? Well, what that means is the Christ impulse. And the whole choir of the hierarchical beings that are working to create this great symphony of existence that we now inhabit. And that it's up to us to be able to take up the task through our interactions with other people, to be able to arise to that experience of Whitsun and the experience of the tongues of flame and that language of all things, the Langvert, the green language, that they could speak to all hearts. And that's that language of poetry. And it doesn't take all kinds of complicated concepts because, well, if you look at like Parsifal, for example, who is the central subject of my first book, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, he didn't know anything. Literally, his mother made sure he didn't know anything because her husband took off as a knight and never came back, right? And so she shielded him, and yet Parsifal, through his own questing and the purity of his heart, was able to move from that tumphite, that dullness into the salda or blessedness, just on the purity of his aspirations to be a good person aligned with truth. And so he achieved the kingship of the Holy Grail. And so that the mystery of the Grail is that central theme, that universally human aspect that the Christ impulse is bringing for mankind. Everybody has the opportunity to take it up, but they're perfectly free not to.
It's hard to imagine what used to be here in the Waldorf Institute. You mentioned Carlo Pietzner. Carlo Pietzner was an initiate, there's no doubt. And you could tell by the waves of Christian consciousness and love coming out of his heart and his eyes, and just the way he treated every single person he encountered, you knew you were in the presence of one of the great ones. Well, we got to meet all those people. Rudolf Werner Glass, Dr. Werner Glass, lived with Norbert Glass when he was a child, who inherited like the letters of Rudolf Steiner's brother and all these things. He knew every anthroposophist that was coming through England at the time, because Dr. Norbert Glass was the anthroposophic doctor. And so Werner knew everybody. So he brought to Detroit, and it's funny, I told the story of how in Spring Valley and in Sacramento, those teacher training institutes folded. But I first started when I went to Adelphi University, and it folded. So the three places, there were four places, but the three places I went to folded when I tried to start my teacher training or my orientation year at those places. So I was forced to end up coming to Detroit, and that was by an accident. Someone handed me a brochure, and I'd been looking everywhere. They had such bad publicity that I couldn't even find them, when I was looking for them. So I'm like, what? I was headed to Europe again. Someone handed me this brochure, and I'm going to end up in Detroit? And all the beautiful places I've been and all the great places Waldorf schools are. The most beautiful places in the world have Waldorf schools because rich people are there, and they're there for the beauty, and they want to. Detroit was considered like the darkest place in America at the time. Okay, and I'm like, oh, why? Why would this be? How could this be? And they'd already, I was still a Jesuit at the time, but I was free to do whatever I wanted. They sent me off to study anthroposophy in Waldorf and see what the Catholic Church could glean from it. And so I ended up in Detroit, not by my own choice. But then I found out later when the Waldorf Institute drew to it every great anthroposophist in the world. All the members of the Vorstand would come and teach us, all the best anthroposophic doctors in the world, the people leading every form of art or any of the sciences that Rudolf Steiner has renewed. Those leaders came to us and taught us in the orientation year and the teacher training year, and then there was an early childhood and a special education year. So you could stay in this program and also take just general courses. Well, John and I stayed in the course for 11 years, as he said, but he actually ended up teaching in the course cosmology. You were part of that cosmology class, and he was there all the time. He met these people. Plus, he was directly connected to of anthroposophy in a very deep way. So we got to meet people like John Davies and Hagen Besant and Virginia Cease and Rudolf Grossa and you name it. At that time, I knew every single Vorstand member, that's the executive committee of the Anthroposophic Society, personally, because they'd come through Detroit, and I was Werner's boy, and I, was always around, and I got to meet the greatest eurythmists, the greatest artists, the architects, everything, amazing. So for all those years, it was the place, and then it closed, and it moved back to Spring Valley, and it's now called Sunbridge College, but it's nothing like it was. In those days, we were such a spiritual center that Robert Thibodeau and the Mayflower would invite David Spangler and Kathy Malenko-Montanovich or anybody we wanted. Robert would put up the money to bring them. They'd do a talk. They'd make a bunch of money if they did readings or whatever they did, consultations. He'd set that up. They'd make a ton of money. And so people loved to come visit us. So we would sit in the circle with just about anybody you can name, from William Irwin Thompson to David Spangler, the supposed, leader of the New Age movement, as it were, but also very spiritual people of all sorts. And they all came into the Mayflower, and John knew them all. And when he would meet these really cool people, he'd oftentimes set up the chance for me to meet them. And literally, it's untold how many esotericists came through Detroit in that time. And now all those people went out, and many of them are Waldorf trained. I ended up being a Waldorf trainer, and the Institute for Training here, I taught it for many, many years, maybe decades, and then it folded. So when it comes down to it, what Detroit was is no more. And the reason for it was because, like history is not events and dates and wars and battles. It's biographies. And when you start listing the biographies of the people who worked together in Detroit, at one point, David Spangler turned to our group at Brian Lynch's house, and we said, somebody asked, perhaps it was you, do you go to spiritual groups like this all over the world? I mean, you are the leader of the New Age, I'm paraphrasing the question. And he says, no, you guys are it. You're it. And there's none other. And we were like totally all shocked, because this is the guy who travels all over for spiritual whatever. And he's telling us we're the group. And, we invited him many times, and he became a friend. We did conferences with him, and some, I think one of our group is still in contact with David Spangler. And so we had just about anyone you can imagine. Look at Marianne Williamson. Marianne Williamson. Look at Lynn Andrews. They came to worship the Mayflower in a way and circled around it. Marianne Williamson came to live here. Lynn Andrews came to visit many times and begged Robert and I to come out and visit her, which, and she's, these are people who led the women's movement for years. So I'm not just talking about anthroposophists. I'm talking about, as John said, basically universalism. And that's what we were about. And but now, if you're a real universalist and you study it all, if you want the shortcut, just use anthroposophy, use Steiner's teaching, and you're going to find basically the best cosmology. But you'll also find that it links up with all the truth that you found in every other system, or at least it has for me. And I assume that would be the same for yourself. So, in your path towards ascension through Whitsun, it is all about discerning the spirit, and that's discerning the Holy Spirit and Sophia, and Michael, and all the beings there ready to help you. And then it's about finding the truth. And the real truth is that Christ as a being of the Trinity and as a solar being came and has found his place in the throne of your heart. And if that's the case, then as John has pointed out, the apocalypse is a victory story. It is not the scary story. It's the story of the victors. It's the story of those who sing the eternal song, who preach the eternal gospel, who are protected by the line of Judah of Christ, and the spiritual marriage of your soul to your spirit. That's what the apocalypse is talking about. So I think Robert Thibodeau was right when he said to me the other day, people have the apocalypse now, but they don't have the revelation.
Yes. Well, I have to do this because it's a part of what we've done over the years. There's a foreword by Douglas here. My first book, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, in which I tried to summarize in some 640 pages. The path of the Grail is laid out by Rudolf Steiner, and take the handwritten diagrams that came across our desks back in the day from Aaron Pfeiffer to where we could expand on these concepts and enter into the mystery of the Gospel of Mark, the mystery of the Zodiac. And so that was a big part of our exploration at the time. And if you want to dig deeper into our relationship to each other, you can get those from me directly on eBay, or contact me if you're outside the US through private message on Facebook, or there's a link below for my academia page. You can contact me there, and you can also get Douglas's and Tyla, his amazing partners, books on the Gabriel bookshelf that's listed below. And also there's links for his other books, and they're all available for free if you want to get them in a digital format, or you can order paper copies. And so that being said, I wanted to make sure I said that, because I tend to get ahead of myself a little bit. But there's, at this point, I see it as being summarized most effectively by what's going on today regarding what Rudolf Steiner said. We spent an inordinate amount of time discussing the occult brotherhoods that were working behind the scenes. And that's very important to understand, because around that time when we were all constellated together, occult movements of the 19th century, which is a lecture cycle of Rudolf Steiner's, came out that got into talking about all that. And also copies of The Transcendental Universe by C.G. Harrison was obtained by myself and a few other people, because it was so rare nobody even heard of it, but it's referenced in the occult movements in the 19th century. And so I wanted to share with you a quote that most people don't have a chance to see because it's in a kind of an obscure lecture cycle called Behind the Scenes of External Happenings. And this is the second lecture that was done in Zurich on November 13, 1917. It's Collected Works, Volume 178. But here in Rudolf Steiner says, and I quote, "Today there is evidence on all hands that when one speaks of man's concrete relationship with the spiritual world to those who as yet know nothing about anthroposophy, they are unwilling to go into such matters. They are afraid of it all. They will not summon up courage to think about impulses that are said to come from the spiritual world." And then I take up later, that after all is why people simply do not listen when it was said that momentous, incisive thoughts and undertakings are called for by men if the world is to be lifted out of its present pitiable state, and that such thoughts and undertakings must be born from the spiritual knowledge, real spiritual knowledge, Constant references to the universal spirit, all the talk about inner spiritual deepening and the like, none of it leads anywhere. What is essential is that men of the present time shall establish real and concrete relations with the spiritual world, Intimate and penetrating knowledge of these things is the only means whereby the aims of the spirits of darkness may be counteracted. Certain occult brotherhoods, however, make it their business to work in exactly the opposite sense. They want to retain wisdom exclusively within their own narrow circles in order to exploit it in connection with their lust for power. We are living in the midst of this struggle. On the one side, there is the necessity for men to be led along the right path by the assimilation of the spiritual truths, and on the other side, there are enclosed occult brotherhoods of an evil kind, desiring to prevent these truths from finding their way to men, with the result that they remain dull and stupid as regards the spiritual world, and thus make it possible for those within narrowly enclosed brotherhoods to carry on their intrigues there. And I could read further, but I think you get the point. And so this is what we're looking at this time of the seventh trumpet, as that take heart, because it's that courage that you find within your soul that aligns your quest for truth in whatever form you may pursue it, that is your shield. And it's that being able to take that measure of truth and then look and see that the fear that you might experience is ultimately the other end of hatred. And so in order to overcome that fear, you have to overcome the hatred of any group for any generalized reason, because that's not the impulse we're talking about. We're talking about a universally human impulse, so that you have compassion. Maybe the person that you think will never get it, well, they'll come around in their next life. You don't know. And so the best thing you could do is to try and find an excuse to express love to your fellow human beings. And I want to also just make a general, because I don't want to look it all up right now, but I have lots of friends that I want to acknowledge. Of course, leading the list is Tyla, Gabriel, and Vadim, and there's a cast of individuals that have been helpful for me to be able to pull this off. But so I didn't want to forget to acknowledge them. But I pass it back to you.
Well, I think that we have addressed the topic quite adequately, and the thing we've been doing now for 4 decades or however long it's been. And all I can say is it seems as if we're getting somewhere, and that we've got to the place where we can now begin. And that as long as we keep working, maybe we'll be forgiven for our ignorance when the time comes. But I tell you, when I hear truth, it rings beautifully true in my heart, and it also acts as nourishment. So cosmic intelligence is like truth. So continue to seek for truth.
Amen. Yes. And there's not much more that could be said beyond that those that are serving the spirits of darkness are serving the falsehood. So they really don't have any power that you don't assign to them. And so you can be nourished in the understanding that you're participating in something higher when you pursue this truth in the spirit of love and freedom. And so, Douglas, I want to thank you and Tyla, and I hope you have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much, John.